Hayden, good morning. How's it going? It's too bad you can't join us here in Korea. It's a huge crowd and it's a great place, great vibes, and really awesome times. Because I know that you are a Korea fan. You have a fun story about your first time in Seoul, don't you? Hey, can you hear me? Okay,
Yeah, can you hear me?
perfect. Hey, so no problem. So good morning. Too bad you can't make it join us here in Korea. It's a huge crowd right now and good vibes all around. But you're a big Korea fan, aren't you? You've got like a fun story about your first time in Seoul with Vitalik.
Yeah, so last time I was in Korea, and by the way, great to be here. Thanks for having me. Thanks for hosting. I can't see the crowd, but I'm sure it's a beautiful crowd full of awesome people. Um, so last time I was in Korea was in spring 2018, almost 9 months before I launched Uniswap V1. And at the time, I had a friend who worked at the Ethereum Foundation. He was the person who got me to get into crypto. His name's Carl. And Carl sent me a message one day, and he said, "Hey, I'm going to be traveling to Korea with Vitalik. You should come to Korea, and I might be able to introduce you to him." And so, keyword might. And I didn't have a ticket to the conference, but I flew out to Korea for this meeting that Vitalik didn't know about, and I wasn't sure if it was actually going to happen. And my friend told me, because I didn't have a ticket, I wasn't allowed in the conference center. And my friend told me to wait outside the conference center so that when him and Vitalik walked past, he would, introduce us. And so I wake up early. I'm waiting outside the conference center. Can't go inside. And eventually, Carl and Vitalik walk past, and then Carl's like, "Oh my God, what a surprise! So cool to see you here." And then introduced me to Vitalik. I had gotten some of the original idea of Uniswap from some of his blog posts, and I was starting to implement them. And so I told him about Uniswap and what I was building. The first thing he asked me is, was the GitHub repo open source? And I told him how to find it. He immediately opens it on his phone and starts reading the smart
Oh,
contracts.
wow, that's cool.
Yeah, within a minute of meeting him. And for me, I was a little nervous because it was my first smart contracts that I'd ever written, and Vitalik was the creator of smart contracts. And but yeah, ultimately that conversation led to the Ethereum Foundation grant, to a lot of support from Vitalik along the way, and so it's really important. It also happened to be during when the cherry blossoms were blossoming in Seoul, so it ended up being a really beautiful time. I had a great time in the city as well, and I got to
That's
accidentally meet
awesome. So
Vitalik.
you passed with Vitalik real-time due diligence with your GitHub, like on the spot. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, he just immediately within seconds was just reading the code on his phone.
Awesome, very cool. So looking to this year, what excites you about the market here in Asia and Korea? What do you see from your end about the growth of DEXs in this area?
Yeah, for sure. So what excites me most is just the opportunity. So my understanding right now is that centralized exchanges are still very, very big. I mean, centralized exchanges kind of dominate across the world, but I know in Korea and in Asia that a lot of people just use centralized exchanges, and I'm really excited for the benefits of decentralized exchanges, and for more people to be able to kind of start moving towards. I think that we're going to be able to make the user experience and the benefits of DEX really show through, and I'm really excited for what that means for a whole global audience. Right today, only about 10% of our users are in the U.S., and so our users are really scattered around the entire world, including Korea. And I think that when you look at what happened a year ago, when you look at what happened with FTX, and during the last downturn, we saw that a lot of centralized platforms, there was a lot of risk in the centralization of those platforms. And for me, I think that was really a strong demonstration point of the purpose of more decentralized technology and of decentralized exchange. And building an exchange that, or a place people could trade tokens that really, all of the reserves are completely public, are completely transparent, how it works. Anyone can build on top of it. I'm really just excited about that vision, and I think that there is so much opportunity for that to play out within Asia and within Korea, and so I'm really excited for that.
Very cool. So the first big time DEXs grew was post FTX, when people really started to trust DEXs versus centralized exchanges. But FTX crashed 2 years ago. So looking forward, how do you keep on growing DEXs? How do you excite users and convince them that they're the future?
Yeah, that's a good question. I will say that there's actually probably been a few moments in time. We've been through a few cycles now. And before FTX, there was like, what we call DeFi summer. And that was a huge moment of, exploration for what is and isn't possible. When I think about like what the purpose of this thing that we're building is, I think about it as like the internet made information just like instantly global and accessible all around the world, right? And that was like a really powerful unlock. No matter where you are in the world today, you have access to like far more information than even the most privileged people did, 100 years ago. Because of this like very powerful system that we built on the internet using standard information sharing protocols. And to me, what DeFi is all about is taking that same approach that humanity took to information and using it for a world of ownership and assets. And so making a system where anyone can create an asset and it's instantly accessible to anyone else anywhere around the world. It's all completely transparent. It's all completely standardized. It sort of just works the same way that the internet just works. And so that's like kind of like the vision that we're pursuing. When it comes to like, we've been through many rounds. Uniswap is sort of, today considered pretty dominant in the decentralized exchange space. And the way that we've managed to do that is not like just because we were some of the earliest, but because we've like not been afraid to continuously innovate and reinvent what we do. Right. So we started out with like Uniswap v2, which was this very simple design, and it worked pretty well. But we ultimately had to basically kill it by building Uniswap v3, which was just like far more efficient, far more flexible. Last year we launched a protocol called Uniswap X, which again, in some ways like competes with Uniswap's other protocols, but is aimed at just further improving the efficiency. And I think that like, for us, it's about a few things. One, we have to like continue to upgrade the technology to make it cheaper and safer and more flexible. And that's what we're doing with things like Uniswap v4. And then we also need to like continue to innovate and push on making it easier and easier and easier to use. I think that like when you look back at what we launched with in 2018, it was this like very simple protocol and then this very simple user experience built on top of it. Today we've like continued to push and innovate at that level. We in the past few months we launched a browser extension. Before that we launched our mobile wallet, and then we have our original web app. And so I think what we're doing is essentially continuing to think across the entire tech stack. What are the pain points that users find when they want to interact with crypto, when they want to buy and sell a token, and how can we solve it, right? And so that's what spurred the purpose of our wallet, right? When we looked at our user ticket, our user support issues and the things our users were complaining about when they interacted with our website, it wasn't actually anything on our website. It was often like the wallets that they connected to the website, and there was sort of like friction points between them. And so we're basically both like kind of continuing to push up the stack and trying to make it easier and easier to onboard and use. And we're also continuing to push further down the stack, trying to solve technical barriers to adoption to kind of further the goal of making it cheaper and safer.
For sure. I mean, I think amongst crypto people, we all agree that a DEX right now is easy to use. It's pretty simple, right? But we're crypto nerds. For the retail people, they might be intimidated by the wallets, swapping, that kind of stuff. So how do you guys think you can onboard those next billion users who want to trade crypto, they want to swap, but they still have a bit of nervousness about the whole process?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I have to say that like, you have to like start thinking about these systems. I think it's like easy for people that are like deep in the space to sometimes think that what we've built is easier to use than it actually is. And it's like, because people who are deep in the space have so much context, so much knowledge, and so much time to build up understanding. Sometimes when I think about blockchains, people often like think of them as these like completely magic new things. And I think that they're really cool and special, but I think that like one very simple mental model for what a blockchain even is like, it's almost like a server with like superpowers. Like, you have a server, but if you want your server to never go down, you can use one of these fancy blockchain servers. You have a server, but if you don't want a single party to be able to, kick people off or operate it themselves, you need one of these fancy blockchain servers. But then when you think about like how a server relates to an application and a user experience, we're basically exposing users to far too many of the actual underlying mechanics of the server. And what I mean by that is like, what are gas fees? Gas fees are kind of like AWS credits, right? But like users don't, when a user sends an email, they don't think like how many AWS credits am I going to use, because that's like abstracted away for them. And so what we really need to do from like a user experience perspective is like continue to abstract away the complexity of the chain. And so that means things like network fees. It also means things like networks themselves. Like, we're entering this world. Ethereum is on, what people call this like roll-up centric roadmap, which means it's scaling by having, multiple chains run in parallel on top of, the main chain. And that's useful for scaling. But when you think about like the mental burden we're putting on users when we expose them directly to, like here's a drop-down menu and you see all of the chains in it, that's like far too complex, right? People don't want to think about that. Also, when a user signs up, they don't want to think about like self-custody is a really important, powerful concept. It's very important that people have the ability to self-custody. But when you think about, what it means today in like self-custody wallets, it's pretty scary to people. People don't want to think, if I lose my password, I'll lose all of my money, right? And people don't want to think, I have to remember these like 24 weird words, and that's how if I forget them, I'll lose my money. If someone else gets them, they get all my, like, people don't want to, we have to basically reach the levels of simplicity of existing systems for new users while still trying to retain the underlying benefits. And so that means, continuing to work on abstracting away the wallets. Something that we're doing right now for chain abstraction is we're developing a protocol and continuing to build towards a really simple cross-chain trading experiences. And by cross-chain trading, I mean that users shouldn't even eventually see the chains, but you should be able to buy a token if it's on a different chain that's handled for you behind the scenes. So it's really about just continuing to focus on onboarding. I think that's one advantage that Uniswap has relative to a lot of competitors in different parts of the stack, is that we think very full stack. And so by having a customer experience team and a user-facing wallet, while still having low-level protocol expertise, we're able to start to identify problems that users are facing, solve them on the technical side in a way that really abstracts them away from people.
For sure, yeah. So you guys have a grand vision about the future of finance, but it doesn't look like the SEC shares that vision. You guys were served a Wells notice recently. And so can you share your thoughts on this and how you might work with regulators to try and convince them that your vision's not so bad and you're not some, elaborate fraudster or something?
Yeah, look, I think, and by the way, to maybe just for people who don't know, a Wells notice is not being sued. It's essentially the SEC saying, we think we plan to sue you. And then there's
not a lawsuit,
the next step. Yeah. And it's not a lawsuit. And then, we followed up with a Wells notice response, which is, this is why we think you shouldn't sue us. And that was maybe 4 months ago. And then since then, as of now, there's no enforcement action. Generally most Wells notices are, turn into enforcement actions. So we don't really know if we are going to be sued or not. But the way I think about it is that this technology fundamentally, from my perspective, is very empowering, right? The internet was an empowering technology. It's good for the world. I don't think anyone will say that the internet is only a good thing, right? The internet can be used for good and bad, but it is fundamentally useful for humanity and very and a very empowering thing. And in the early days of the internet, there was a move in the US to basically outlaw internet-based commerce, right? E-commerce. It was this is too scary. If people buy things on the internet, they could buy anything, and this is too scary. We should shut this down. And then, fortunately, at the time, the US was smart enough that it essentially put in this sort of and this is under Bill Clinton. The US was essentially smart enough to kind of say, okay, this is new, this is important. We should leave it alone, let it develop. And definitely think about ways to make it safe, but not try to completely shut it down. And I think it was really ultimately very good for the U.S. that it did that. I think for me, when I talk to whether it's people in the political world or regulators in the U.S. or in any other country, I think the biggest thing that I hope from regulation is that it is aware of the technology. And what I mean by that is that regulation, has a purpose, right? Regulations usually aimed at things like how do we make sure that things that are opaque become transparent? How do we make sure that people, when they invest in things, they have the right information? And how do we make sure that people running the things aren't secretly absconding with all the money, right? And that's what you see with things like FTX. And things like FTX, fully centralized platforms, really need to be regulated in a very particular way. I think that when you think about though, how do you make sure that the reserves are actually there? When you apply that same principle to a DeFi project, to something like Uniswap, it's completely like the reason that Uniswap reserves are there is because they're completely public in real time to the entire world. And so a regulation that is aimed at like a specific company revealing their reserves doesn't apply in the same way to a smart contract that has public reserves, right? And so I think that like for me, my hope from regulators is that they recognize the benefits of the technology, and they create rules that allow those benefits to shine through and ultimately further accomplish their regulatory goals. In terms of us specifically, again, I will say that like only 10% of our users are in the US, and so we have a global user base. And I will say that we think that we will win if they do bring a case. We have we outlined it in our Wells Notice response, which is public, but we think that we have a very, very strong case. The SEC is honestly often like losing cases in the US right now. In the past, I think that regulators have usually taken the stance that like, they want to bring cases where they're very confident and they're going to win. If for whatever reason in crypto, it feels like they're not afraid to take cases that they're going to lose. But that's sort of where we think we're at.
But you guys are a very like multinational, decentralized exchange, obviously, right? Like you said that 10% of your folks are in the US, your users are in the US. Would you think about ever leaving the US? Would you ever go to Singapore or jurisdictions that have regulations which are more, conducive to your business?
I get asked this question sometimes. I think that if I had to leave the US, I guess I would, but I don't think we're close to that, right? I think that like, I think that certainly like, I think there's like US users versus, where the company's located. I think that like, right now it's probably like a slight disadvantage or maybe a medium-sized disadvantage to being in the US for some reasons. But I think on the other side, like, a lot of our team is based here. And, I think that ultimately if we make it, I think that like, there's sort of like, there's like risk and there's reward as well, which is like, someone has to kind of navigate this. Like, we think this is like important technology for the US. We think it's here to stay. And we think that like, we're kind of like a good representative of it. And so, we could leave and not bother to fight the lawsuit, but then someone else might fight the lawsuit, and that might ultimately be, worse for the world if they lose. And we think we're like in a good position. So if ultimately, we think that like what we're doing is on the right side of history, and we think what we're doing is like good for the world. And so we don't want to like hide. We don't think we should hide. We think what we do is legal. And we've like taken a lot of care and effort to make sure of that. So as of now, we don't plan to leave.
For sure. So we're almost out of time. So last question. Any updates on the fee switch token votes? Because that was a big deal earlier this year, and you guys said stay tuned. Any updates right now for that?
Yeah. So one thing I'll say is I currently run Uniswap Labs, the company that develops a lot of software. We build the interface. We build the wallet. The kind of governance system and the kind of conversation within the governance forums and token voting is sort of the territory of the Uniswap Foundation, and less something I'm involved in day to day. I believe that whole conversation is taking place in public, so I don't really have any like specific news or things there. I think that like that conversation will play out in the public forums, and and it's kind of more the territory of the Uniswap Foundation, which is not the org I run.
Okay, fair enough. Well, hey, thanks for your time, and we'll see you next year in person here in Seoul.
Yeah. Yes, I hope to be here there in person next time. Thank you. I think this is the Korean heart thing.
Yes, the Korean heart thing for sure. Okay, thanks a lot.
Yeah, have a good one.
Thank you, Hayden and Sam, for that.